Alright, so I have my pan here. I just have enough oil on the bottom just to fry. And I have my steak here. I'm doing cube steak tonight. So I just turned this on, let this get hot. I have an egg here that I'm just going to get right into. Just kind of mix that up a little bit. I'm going to take my meat and just flip it over in there. I'm hoping you guys can see this. I could not find my tripod tonight, so I'm doing my best. I don't know where it's at. And then in this bowl, I just have a bowl here of flour and Lowry seasoned salt. And I'm just going to take this and just make sure it's good. And I'm just going to drop it in the grease. To know if grease is hot, if you will just take a pinch of flour and just sprinkle it. My grease is not hot enough because it's not sizzling. It should immediately start sizzling because it's frying that flour that I just put in there. So now that there's a little bit of flour in there, as soon as it is hot enough, it's going to start popping and sizzling because it's frying it. So I'll just let it sit there until it starts doing that. You do not want to put your fried meat into hot grease or into grease before it's hot, because instead of frying it, it will absorb the grease, and you do not want greasy fried food. You want it fried in grease, but you do not want it saturated in grease. So as soon as I get it started going, I'll show you the process.
So I decided to do something different. I've never done this before, but I was going to do a voiceover because the grease was so loud after frying that you could hardly hear me. As you can see, I dumped grease out just by splashing it over, and I'm just going to drop that little piece of extra meat in the pan. The issue with gravy and breading is there's no real measurement on this. I just kind of, just put here and there, and you'll learn more the more that you do it. So I'm adding this to the pan. This pan is a little bit too small for my liking, but it is what it is. I'm going to use what I have. We were in the middle of moving and packing up, and I didn't have a whole lot of pans. You want to make sure that your grease is hot because you don't want it to absorb into that meat. Also, you're going to see this grease is pretty brown because it is dipped in flour. And flour does make your grease turn pretty brown. I'm just turning that over right there. It looks pretty done to me. You don't have to have this super done because you are going to be cooking this later on when you add it to the gravy. Here I've switched to using tongs because I'd already washed my hands. If you have a problem touching raw meat, which a lot of people do, you can just use tongs all the time. It's not going to hurt anything. Also, the longer that sits in that flour, it's going to absorb into that meat. So you might have to flip that a couple times just to keep it floured nicely. There's not a measurement on that oil either. I just pour it in. You don't want to deep fry the meat, so you don't want to submerge the meat in oil. You just want enough across the bottom to actually just fry. You do not want it to cover the meat whenever you place the meat down. As you can see, that meat is a little bloody still, but again, we're going to be cooking that again in the gravy, so nothing to worry about there. It is steak, so a lot of people eat steak medium rare, so it's not a big deal that it is bloody. I'm trying to decide if I have enough oil here to make the gravy with what I have, or if I've added too much or if I needed more. Again, there's no measurement on that, so it makes it really hard for new beginners making gravy because again, there's just no measurement. You do not want it to be too thick where it's lumpy, but you also do not want it so soupy that it can't thicken up. So you just have to find a happy medium. And that looks like it has a pretty good sear on it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that out and drop in the next piece. Again, this pan is way too small. I could not fit more than 2 of these in it at a time, and I had a total of 4, but just using what I have. Do not throw away your excess flour. We're going to be using that flour to make the gravy with later on. So keep that flour. Again, that flour is just flour and Lowry seasoned salt. We're going to be adding this Worcestershire sauce to make the gravy. My mom and my grandma, that's just how they always made their gravy for the steaks. And I'm showing you there what seasoning I used. So yeah, just leave that flour there because we're going to add it, and then add in the Worcestershire sauce to give it a little bit of a tang. It does, but it also waters it down just a hair. So you can go ahead and drop your pan down to a 1 at this stage. This is my last piece of meat that's frying. Because the grease is hot, it is going to stay hot for a little bit longer, and you do not want that grease hot when you put the flour in there, because you don't want it to cook too fast. So I'm pulling that off and adding that to the plate of meat that is growing greatly. And I'm still trying to decide if I have enough oil in there or if I have too much oil. And that looks like a good sear on that. As you can see, I was talking through the video, was not planning to voice over, so it looks a little funny. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. Again, my grease has been on 1 for about 3 minutes, I would say, cooling down. See all those crumbs? You want to keep all that in there. Another reason why you don't want to use too much oil is this stuff is so dirty after you use it. You're going to have to throw it away, and you don't want to waste a bunch of oil. So that was actually the perfect amount of oil. It comes with years of practice. So now I have a whisk, and I'm just breaking up all those pieces on the bottom of the pan. You want to make sure they're not stuck to the bottom of the pan, but you also want to make sure that they are separated. And now we're going to we're going to pour this flour into the pan. And here is the part, yeah, make sure you get all that flour out, because that's going to thicken. Also, anything that's left in there is going to fry up in that pan, so it's going to make really good gravy. And here's a part where you just got to mix and mix and mix. You're wanting to make sure that you don't have lumps. You want to make sure that that flour is cooking, because you do not want the raw taste of flour. You want it to be browned. You also want to make sure that you're absorbing all that grease, and you're wanting to make sure that you have all those goody crumbs from the meat incorporated throughout that flour. But again, you're also wanting to make sure that it's not burning or lumping, because it is cooking too much. Gravy is only flour and oil, grease, crumbs, whatever you have. So depending on what you're cooking, depends on the darkness of the gravy. Gravy is just flour and water, or milk and water, half and half. And so therefore, the longer you let it cook, the darker it's going to be. Also, the longer you cook, you don't want gravy to taste like flour. So even if you want a white gravy, you want to cook it for just a few minutes, because otherwise it is not going to have a good flavor. You want that good meat flavor. So again, I'm just stirring this, letting it cook a little bit. You can either use half and half. You can use evaporated milk. You can use 1% or skim milk and be just fine. If you have a 2% or a vitamin D, you want to add milk or water to that milk, half and half, because you don't want it just to be straight milk. And again, there's no measurements on this. I'm sorry. You do want to make sure that your gravy, flour, whatever, your mixture is salted good, because that's the only seasonings that you're putting into the gravy. And here I'm just adding it in a little bit at a time, and again, whisking constantly. You don't want to stop whisking here. So I'm stirring again, seeing how much I need. And you're going to kind of feel, and it takes practice, it really does. A lot of people say that gravy is hard to make. To me, gravy is hard to mess up as long as you've cooked it long enough, because if you have too much milk in it, you can always add more flour to thicken it. And if it's too thick, you can add more milk to thin it down. So in that aspect, I feel like it's super easy to make and just very hard to really mess up. And as long as you have good seasoning in it, it's going to taste delicious. So I'm stirring again, making sure that that's all incorporated. You also don't want to make sure that this is just sitting there in the pan, because not only will it scorch because it does have milk product in it, which easily scorches, but also it will lump, and you do not want lumpy gravy. So here I'm going to add the Worcestershire sauce. I ended up at the end, I would say, using a good 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. I sprinkled it in and was like, okay, yeah, that's enough. And I started stirring and then realized, yeah, that's not enough. But this is going to make it a little bit darker, but it's also going to thin it down just a little bit. And again, this is a personal preference. Not everyone likes the flavor of Worcestershire sauce. We really enjoy it, and this is just how my family has always made it all growing up. And it's already thickening, as you can see here. It's starting to thicken up and has a beautiful color on it. You can tell gravy is thickening whenever you're starting to use your whisk and you're starting to see lines following you. It's thickening fast. So here I'm just going to add the meat right back into the pan. Again, like I said, it's going to cook, so it doesn't have to be totally cooked through. And we're just going to overlap those because there's just not enough room. And I realized, oh, I'm putting a lid on it because I want it to steam. So it's cooking that meat, finishing up that cooking that meat. It's also going to tenderize that meat as well, because again, we just fried it. And that's my bloody pan. Hopefully that doesn't bother you. But that's how much blood had came out of that meat, because it still was not cooked. But it's going to be okay because it's going to cook in that pan. And I decided I hadn't put any pepper or anything. And then I realized that's dillweed. That is not pepper. So I'm going to grab the pepper and start putting pepper over it. And I'm going to taste the gravy here, see if it tastes okay. Because like I said, there was no pepper in the seasoning of the flour. And it's perfect. It just needs a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. I'm going to add a little bit more Worcestershire sauce. That's why I said I did a good 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire. And all you can do is taste to see if you have enough in there. Everyone's different. And I'm just going to put, I'm going to move those around just a little bit. Give them a little bit more room. I didn't want to make sure that it wasn't burning on the bottom. And then I'm just going to put that lid right back on it and let them steam some more and cook. And I'm going to finish up on my dinner. With this, I made mashed potatoes and green beans. And I'll show you the finished product. It was absolutely delicious.